This is an article from The Independent in the UK. As a proud University of Idaho alumnus, class of 1986, and former alumni magazine editor, among other positions I held in my alma mater, my heart is in a million pieces following the November 13th murder of 4 students, Ethan Chapin, Madison Morgan, Zana Carnoodle, and Kaylee Concleves, 21, of Rathdrum, Ohio. The lack of any silent leads in the case or persons of interest is frustrating and frankly makes one wonder as to the corruption of local law enforcement. Not surprisingly, rumors flourish on social media sites such as Reddit, adding to the fear and paranoia of students and locals alike in the city of Moscow. Everybody's a suspect. That sounds familiar, a little like Delphi. News crews from around the world have set up shop in front of the home where the students were fatally stabbed. Fox News spent an entire segment on wondering if the first responders had somehow bungled the crime scene evidence. These out-of-town parachuters use words like idyllic and peaceful to describe the city of 25,000, as if wheat fields and wilderness could never harbor such violence. If the reporters had dug a little deeper, they might have discovered the dramatic murders, disappearances, and even mass shootings are part of Moscow's legacy. On a gorgeous July day in 1991, my boss and I were from the UI News Bureau, walked to the nearby university auditorium to witness something unimaginable. A young man hanging from a noose in a tree with his hands bound behind him. He had been discovered that summer morning by an 11-year-old who was attending a summer day camp. None of this made any sense. Above the deceased man, birds were chirping, squirrels were cavorting, and one could hear the laughter of students in the distance. Because this was a time in northern Idaho when the white nationalist group Iron Nations was in active presence in the area, and because the dead student was dark-skinned, the local and national media suggested a racially motivated lynching. Soon our little news bureau office was inundated with calls from national and international media outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, ABC News, and too many others to recall. Satellite trucks appeared at our office out of thin air. The problem was, it was not a lynching. It was a suicide by a distressed Middle Eastern student, Sharon Andrew Akaban. For 24 hours, all the media was going on was a statement by Moscow police chief who inaccurately described Akaban as a young black man. Nor did it help that the local newspaper, the Idahonian, insensitively published the pictures of Akaban hanging in the woods on the front page above the fold. That's really sad. Fast forward to a snowy December night in 2001 when my daughter's best friend, Tanya Hart, also 21, answered a knock at her trailer. The last moment of her life was opening the door when she was then fatally shot. David Meister is currently serving a life sentence for her murder. However, he later recanted his confession and instead claimed that Hart's boyfriend, Jesse Shorty Linderman, hired him to kill Hart for $1,000 with a $100 bonus if Hart was dispatched before Christmas. Initial charges against Lieberman were dropped for a lack of evidence, and for a time he continued to live and work in Moscow. On another personal note, a former colleague of mine at the University of Idaho, Paul Median, 66, disappeared in June of 2008, and to this day has never been found. He was living at the Super 8 motel in Moscow at the time. and left his personal effects behind, including vital medication, and he never accessed any of his financial resources. But there is much more. In 1999, 25-year-old UI student Will Hedrick vanished after attending a party. 3.5 years later, some hunters found his skull and jawbone. His case remains unsolved. In 2007, a sniper killed 3 people in Moscow, including his wife, a police officer, and a sexton at a Presbyterian church. Jason Hamilton took his own life. In 2009, Silas Parks murdered his pregnant wife Sarah and then set fire to their home. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. During sentencing, Parks said he failed utterly at his vows as a husband, and I failed as a decent human being. The potential in me to explode is scary. I can hardly believe what I've done. I love Sarah, and I love her more than life itself. I deserve whatever the court decides to give me. In 2011, University of Idaho graduate student Caitlin Benoit was murdered outside her Moscow home by a former UI assistant professor, Ernesto Bustamante, who then died of a self-inflicted gunshot. In 2015, John Lee went on a killing spree in Moscow, killing 3 people, including his adoptive mother, and severely wounding another victim. Lee is serving a life sentence for those murders. So many murders and mysteries for such a small city. I know of another city that's similar problems. Moscow, Idaho, where I lived and worked for 17 years, is an off-the-grid liberal blue island in a sea of ultra-conservative sea of red. Boise, Idaho, is located around 300 hard-driving miles to the south on US 95, the curvaceous road we used to refer to as Goat Trail. Spokane, Washington is 90 miles away and a 2-lane highway. The airport only flies to Seattle and back. On another personal note, a former colleague of mine at the university, Bill Maitland, 65, disappeared on June 2008. To this day, yeah, we read that already. Going over the same old paragraph. Groovy coffee shops, long-established food co-ops, an indie bookstore, peaceful, the usual touchstones of a college town, to raise a child, as I did. Feel safe from the faraway urban travesties. A child can free range here, yet the landlocked isolation might be Moscow's Achilles heel. Like much of Idaho, the city is outside the mainstream of American currents. Some of the people in Idaho just are not patient. They should take a lesson from Delphi. Rush, rush, rush. They don't care about them getting it wrong. Let them take their time. They'll lose the case when they find this guy, if he doesn't commit suicide or left the country. Who is the Moscow, Idaho killer? Private Idaho. They're living in their own private Idaho. Well, I wish good luck to Moscow, Idaho, and hope they can bring someone to justice for these senseless murders. This is Stu Sutclif reporting, signing off now. Have a great evening and catch you next time.